Fantastic. Should I start us off there, Charlotte? Am I okay to go, Richard? Perfect.
Yeah.
Welcome again, everybody. Welcome back to Beyond the Classroom. Session 11. I say it every week. We really are storming through these sessions today. And today's a really important and a really exciting one, I feel, hopefully a really helpful one, which is about applying to these competitive universities. We're going to be joined by the usual faces, my brilliant co-presenter, Charlotte. Hi, Charlotte.
Hello, nice to see you all again.
And we're joined also by Richard from the outreach team. Hi, Richard.
Hi, nice to see you all again. I mean, Joe and I are saying nice to see you all again. Of course, we can't see you because your cameras are rightly off, but hopefully you can see Charlotte, Joe, and me.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. And let's move on to the next slide. Just so you can see that QR there, it's the same code. We're going to be using Slido. Please do get on there. We want to hear your voices. Let's get started. So just to give you the introduction that I'm sure you're familiar with, hopefully you're familiar with what this program is aiming to do. We really are trying to push you beyond the classroom, as the name suggests. But what does that really mean in practice? Well, let me give you a little taster. Can you pop the next slide on for me, please, Richard? Thanks very much. Oh, of course, let me just make that clear. That here's the who's who. Here's our brilliant outreach team. We will also hopefully today be joined by some other Trinity ambassadors, Trinity students, who are going to be going through some of the questions that we'll discuss. Next slide, please. And one more for me. Thanks so much. So as promised, that taster, what is Beyond the Classroom? Well, we really hope to excite you about these super curricular opportunities, super curricular routes that we're going to be showing you guys, as we've had in the past weeks, talks with experts in their field who have sort of discussed niche areas, things that might interest you, but which you might not be studying in school. We really hope that's going to encourage you to be independent, curious, and kind of challenge yourself to do something that you might not have considered to be your area of interest. As you can see there on the slides, which just move forward, this works through kind of certificate system. We hope you're able to join us for 7 or more sessions. That's what's going to qualify you for that Beyond the Classroom certificate. And as I've said before, we're going to be using Slido. That's where you can be asking those questions, getting involved and having your voice heard. And I think with that, I'll go to the technical side, my co-presenter, Charlotte.
Thanks so much, Joe. Yeah, as usual, all of these sessions will be recorded and we will be popping them onto the Trinity College Oxford YouTube channel at some point in the near future, unconfirmed yet.
Can I come in there, Charlotte, and say that Innocent and I have decided we're going to be doing that hopefully this week. So in other words, next week, put the pressure on myself here. We'll be able to have you saying, Charlotte, and here is the link to the channel where you can find all the past sessions. Back to you, Charlotte.
That sounds great. But even though they're being recorded, we would love for you to join us live as much as you can so that you can register and interact with us through Slido and ask questions and answer our polls. So what's in the programme? Today we have our first ever About University talk, which is very exciting. But before I get ahead of myself, we've got the 2 other types of talks as well. We've got the Trinity talks, which we've had a few of so far, all of different subjects you can see on the screen. We'll be covering a bunch of those. And then we've got cross-curricular talks, which are, for example, sustainability, or Oxplore, which is about critical thinking and big questions. And finally, today's talk is on one of the About University talks. We've got Applying Competitive University today, and then we've also got personal statements coming up. So to get the certificate, we would like for you to join for at least 7 full sessions, and 2 of these would be in Trinity talks that you are in subject areas that you're not already familiar in already. And we would love for you to engage in Slido by answering our polls and questions at least twice per session. Next slide, please, Richard. So in today's session, we've got a talk on applying to competitive universities from Richard, and Joe and I will be supporting it throughout the session as well as current students at Trinity College. And then afterwards, at the end, as usual, we'll have a Q&A. So please submit all of your questions on Slido and we'll do our best to answer them as best as we can. I think at this point, it's time to hand over to Richard, if that's all right.
Yes, just multitasking, trying to get some more people into the session who haven't got the link, but let's see. I'm going to have to move on because it's just myself and Charlotte and Joe this evening with Mahima. Put out a shout for her in the background as well, answering your questions on Slido, which we'd warmly welcome, as Charlotte and Joe have said. So we're going to talk about applying to competitive universities tonight. I'm going to be doing much of the talking, but certainly would love to hear from Joe and Charlotte in real time as we go along too as well for their thoughts on elements of the process. As you've heard, we also have a session specifically on personal statements coming up as Charlotte and Joe will take you through the rest of the program later on, but it's on Tuesday, the 7th of July. So the one element I'm not really going to talk much about tonight is personal statements, but that's quite deliberate because we have our session on the 7th of July. Now, last week was an academic taster. We were slightly teasing Joe before because he wasn't able to join us last week, and it was an absolutely amazing session. So apologies if this is annoying if you weren't with us last week. But Bridget from the Department of Engineering at Oxford took us through an academic taster on, well, it was to do with opportunities in engineering, let's say quite broadly. Background, well, she's doing a PhD at Oxford. She's Department of Engineering Science PhD, aeronautical engineering, but she's also a really possibly literally unique position of having essentially done lots of flying hours as a young air cadet, amazing extracurricular, that then took her into flying aeroplanes, commercial airlines, but also being a member of cabin crew at one point as well. Oh, and by the way, she was also a nurse in the NHS as well. So she's done a few different things, and she brought all these different experiences to bear in a deliberately and quite decidedly academic taste last week. Today, as Charlotte's mentioned, it's more cross-curricular because we're talking about the whole piece. We're not really looking at any one subject or subject areas in particular. We're talking about more generally the process of applying. So there again is that link on Slido and the QR code. Arguably trying to get across a realistic understanding of what the application process is like and increase elements of understanding about particular parts of the stage as well. So first key question really, how do you feel about applying to a university? And I'm just going to make sure I've activated the poll. You can probably tell I'm multitasking here. So let me just open the poll. Here we go. Word cloud for you. How do you feel about applying to university? And when I put these clouds on and these polls on, I've also popped the QR code there for you as well. So as usual, I'll pop across to that subject in a moment when I can. Oh, great, sharing ideas already. Let's get across there. Here we go. So just while we're seeing what you're telling us, Charlotte, Joe, any thoughts? If you remember back to when you were in year 12 in the summer, how did you feel?
I think it's completely normal to be very nervous. It's good to see some positives on there, excited as well. Yeah, it can be quite a scary but exciting process.
I would only echo that, Richard. Yeah, I was very nervous, I'd say, but I was excited as well. I did feel like it was time for that next step. But like you said, Charlotte, it can be a daunting process as well.
Yeah, understood. And that certainly forms a key sort of part of our assumptions when we work in schools. We work in state schools across particularly Oxfordshire, one of our link regions, and North East England, where I'm based, our other link region with Trinity College, Oxford. Okay, those feelings then we would like to reassure. If you're feeling a little bit daunted, that's entirely normal. I noticed also the sense of, potential fear of rejection. I'd like to come in with an opening observation that, most people are getting 3 or 4 or 5 offers from university, having applied for 5 because you apply standardly to 5 universities, or you have the opportunity to through UCAS. So yeah, really thank you for your candor there in engaging with us. So we thought maybe it would also be interesting to ask you where you're thinking of applying. Shoot us some ideas. I've just literally put 4 universities almost out of the clouds there, but of course your range will, I'm sure, be wider. Let's see what this says then. Inevitably, Joe and Charlotte, I'm going to ask you if you can remember, where did you apply to then as 5 choices? That's putting you on the spot a bit, isn't it?
I could definitely give you a couple, Richard. I remember I applied for English at Warwick. I applied for French at Bristol, and I applied to 2 other London unis. Well, there we go. I think I filled up my 5 then, to King's College and to UCL.
Excellent. You remembered all 5, and you did apply to Oxford as well, didn't you?
I did. That's why I didn't even say it. I was just so happy to.
And Charlotte?
I actually wasn't even sure if I was going to apply to university at all. I was thinking about focusing on applications to conservatoires. So I mainly did that, and actually it was only sort of during the application process where I actually decided to shift my focus onto university. But I always
tell
had
us what a
conservatoires.
conservatoire is?
Pardon?
Would you tell us what a conservatoire is then?
Yes. So I'm a music student here, and I play piano, and I love playing piano. And when you go to conservatoire, you do a performance-based degree, or it's a lot more practical, whereas university can be a bit more like academic. And in terms of music, it's more like reading and writing, whereas a music degree in a conservatoire would be a lot more playing, performing, and a lot more like physical assessment instead.
Fantastic, thank you. While you were doing that, I was doing a bit of counting, and I reckon I counted something like 32 or 33 universities coming on the screen there. I think there's about 168 places the last time I bothered counting in the UK that you can get a degree, and about 26,000 universities around the world. I would like to say to those of you who've written something, I don't know, I have no idea where I'm applying to, that's absolutely fine. This is a session, of course, perhaps where the year 12s who've joined us may have more specific ideas than those who are younger. Naturally, throughout this program, we've had students of a wide range of ages join us. And if you are younger than year 12, then we would absolutely expect that at this relatively early stage, you wouldn't have a firm idea of where you're applying to at all, because there's all sorts of discoveries that come your way before you're in the position to do that. Even if you're in year 12, we'd also really like to affirm as well that at this stage of year 12, whilst there are people who they know all 5 choices and they know the course or courses they're applying to, there may still be lots of people who are undecided. We had a student who was an ambassador a few years ago, Olvia, who's now in the 2nd or 3rd year of sort of postgraduate work, and she literally did 2 different applications. She had them lined up, one for physics and one for English. I would argue they're about as different subjects as you possibly get. She did all the preparation for both. I would argue she did a lot of work in that. It wasn't very necessary. But that's because she couldn't decide. She was an amazing English student with us, as it turned out. That's very uncommon. Usually it's around about this stage of year 12 that people are finalising their subject area, okay? And if you are in year 12 and you haven't yet finalised subject area, our response for that would be try and use supercurricular to help you do that. Supercurricular, and we'll come back to it later on in this session, has been an emphasis throughout this course, but it's quite deliberate when we mention these key questions here. It's quite deliberate that we start with course. Essentially, universities, whether it's Oxford or Newcastle or any university you care to mention, would really ideally love to meet students who are saying, I love this subject, I'm really getting passionate about it. What's your course like in this subject? I'm really getting into geography, and I love the human sides of geography. I'm fascinated about why population increases so much more quickly in some countries than in others. I'm really getting into this human geography. Can you do human geography in your geography course? In other words, I may be rabbiting on, but what I'm saying here is really intricate, insightful questions about a course where you can go and look up some details about that course, and more details of that in a moment, rather than say, well, I really want to go to Oxford. What can I study there? Okay, so to be led to a university by arguably its course. Different universities teach in different ways, and indeed teaching is different across different subjects. I would imagine in the 2 subject areas we have here, represented by Charlotte and Joe, teaching is very, very different. Charlotte, is there particular ways in which you're taught as a music student at Oxford that might be very different to subjects in students in other subjects, for example, do you know?
It really depends on the module within our course. So a lot of our modules will have like history modules or modules involving, for example, like philosophy or relating to sort of like real world current things going on, like politics and protests and things like that. And in terms of that sort of thing, it's more of like a general humanities degree. So we'll just have lots of reading to do, and writing essays, and it is just a lot more aligned with humanities. And then I guess for some of the other modules that we'll do, some will be more playing based, performance based, or we'll have composition. And some of my tutorials that I have will happen in the practice rooms. So my tutor and I will sit next to the piano and we'll go through harmony work that I've been doing, and play it out. So it really depends on what module within the course we're actually looking at. But there's a huge range, and it's also very optional for a lot of it. So you really get to choose what particular area you like to focus on.
Brilliant, thank you. If you were a chemist, which you're not, but if you were a chemist, Charlotte, Joe, you'd be spending probably a day and a half, 2 days a week in a lab, for example, and that would be pretty much compulsory part of your timetable in some years of your degree. So your timetable would look very different to your current timetable, for example, where there's a lot of free time, isn't there, and a lot of independence to the study. The third key question we think is underrated. Often students thinking about universities possibly underestimate the importance of place in the decision and whether they would thrive in a particular environment, the city, the campus, for example, that you're choosing to live in. We think that's a key decision as well. Simple response to that is if you're able to, and we'll mention the Oxford side of this later, try and visit on an open day if you're going to apply to make that one of your 5 choices if you can. Often universities will have programs where they'll possibly give you some assistance with travel and accommodation. Most of the universities have open days in June, July, and also in September. All right. And the fourth key question really is universities will make offers, making you conditional offers that are conditional on usually 3 A-level grades, not on 2, not on 4, but on 3. And so there's a combination of 3 grades, usually called a tariff, that a university will say, for our degree, we need you to get this set of grades. So do your likely grades, as predicted by your teachers, at least match that tariff that a given university is asking for a given subject? Okay, and we'll come back to the details of that as well in due course. Charlotte, Joe, at any point you've got anything particular to say, do interrupt me and just come in. Okay, so applications to university, typically the reason why we're expecting quite a few Year 12 attendees this evening is this is getting to the sort of decision-making part of the process for current Year 12 students. If you're in Year 12, you may well have exams right now and they may well be your key focus. But after that, usually the focus really turns to any university applications. So back end of Year 12, you're currently focusing on the core, which is studying for your A-levels and other qualifications. And then as you move into Year 13, you'll be starting to undertake the UCAS process. That will usually take place for students in certain subjects at the start of the year or further on down the line, and I'll go more specifically into that time frame in a minute. The UCAS application will include a personal statement, teacher reference, which is really critical, with their predicted grades for you in the subjects that you're doing at A-level, BTECs and other qualifications. And then having put in the application to UCAS, after that point, you may be liable to receive offers. You'll get an offer or notification that your application is not being considered. Usually then moving through the Year 13 timeframe, it's usually in about January, February, the students make up their mind, having had 5 decisions back from 5 universities have applied for. And then it's a question of selecting 2 universities, one firmly and one as an insurance acceptance. And then once you've accepted those 2, you really focus on getting your A-level grades, which are being required by those 2 universities. And then August, after your Year 13, you get your A-level grades, and if you've accepted those 2 offers through the system on UCAS, those places confirmed. If you get the grades for the place you've accepted firmly, then that place at that institution is guaranteed. If you get the grades, possibly a grade or 2 lower, that you accepted for your insurance acceptance, you have that place guaranteed at that insurance institution. Okay, so there's an element of flexibility in the system and other elements of flexibility as well, because you can go back into the system, for example, through UCAS adjustment in August after A-level results, usually culminating in the start of a university course in late September or early October following year 13. Some students take a gap year, and thus it may be sort of 15 months after they've concluded their A-levels, if that was just a year. Now, a little bit different applying for some subjects nationally, medicine, dentistry, and vet science or vet medicine, in that they have an earlier deadline. Also, that applies if you're applying for any subject to 2 universities, and those 2 universities are Cambridge or Oxford. I'll say Cambridge or Oxford because you're only allowed to apply to one of those 2 institutions as one of your 5 choices. Okay, I'm just going to make sure our questions are coming through. Yeah, that's great. And we will come to them in the Q&A at the end. Any that we haven't picked up there, I can see Mahima's answering them. So thank you very much, Mahima, for doing that. So some students are on an earlier deadline, and that deadline applies to their whole UCAS application being sent on by their school or sixth form college to UCAS. It goes to UCAS and then is sent 5 ways. So you only make one application for up to 5 universities through one institution, UCAS, and then they send it on for you. Frankly, because we think a university application is a relatively straightforward process, I don't want to be so flippant as to suggest it's easy. We realize there's that daunting, there's those, what do I do? You need guidance. But having got the guidance you need, we think, for example, creating a personal statement, we'll deal with that next month, we'll be talking about that, is a relatively straightforward process. And an application can be made in a relatively short space of time. For instance, in 3 sittings of an hour and a half. So in other words, in 4.5, 5 hours, we think between now and early October, if you're currently in year 12, you can do a university application. You could spend scores of hours on it, but frankly, an application that you've spent that amount of time on, we don't think would really be significantly better than the one you spent 5 really high quality hours on. So much as it might suit us to say this, we would argue that it is a benefit getting the UCAS application off early. And I have to say, having been a head of 6th in a school where there was 195 applications a year, I was saying that 10 years ago to students, generally, let's get your UCAS off earlier, even if you're not applying to one of those 2 universities that needs the earlier deadline or the subjects, because it's really nice to get out of the way and then you can focus on the core else that lies ahead in year 13, getting the grades that these universities are going to ask for. As an additional part, if you're applying to a collegiate university, where that's just a university that's made up of a load of colleges like Durham, Oxford, Cambridge, York and Lancaster, for instance, you also can choose a college to apply to. The colleges are essentially similar as academic institutions, the best seen as places to live. Some colleges don't do certain courses, but that's something you can find with a couple of clicks. You can also, at Cambridge or Oxford, choose to make an open application whereby your application is allocated to a college which has a relatively favourable ratio of applications to places in that subject for that entry year. So I would warmly recommend that. So once you made that decision as well, that's the only extra choice you need to make if you're applying to Oxford or Cambridge or other collegiate universities. When you submit your UCAS application, usually slightly before it, we also need you, if you are applying to Oxford or Cambridge, some courses at those 2 universities have an admissions test, and we also need you to register for those as well. An admissions test is a way of us being able to shortlist students for interview more easily, but also we think it's a fairer way of recruiting than, say, students' ability to write a personal statement, because it shows us more about how you're going to thrive on the course you've chosen for than your ability to put together a personal statement. Important though that is for you, and certainly for the universities where they don't get to give you a test or they don't have the privilege of being able to interview you, for example. So for some courses at Oxford and Cambridge, there are also admissions tests, and also there are admissions tests for some courses nationally. Like law, for example, the Law National Aptitude Test is used by many universities across the country to shortlist. The UCAT is used by many medical schools across universities across the country to shortlist for interviews for medicine places. The universities of Oxford and Cambridge, in our case at Oxford, in early December, once we've shortlisted students from their UCAS and looking at things like GCSE grades, predicted grades, particularly admissions tests where they're used, and also written work, which we ask for some courses, usually in early November. This is written work that's already done in the course of a student's studies rather than written work that's for the application. We actually need students and their teachers to sign off on that. So the written work is not a separate thing to do. It's just a question of selecting which written work you've already done to submit to the college you've applied to. But then we shortlist for interview, and we interview in Oxford in early December. We do those interviews online. And then the following month, in January, the same day, we inform all the students who've applied to us at Oxford in that entry cohort whether we're able to make them an offer or whether we're not able to make them an offer. Just making sure these Slido questions go through. They're all there now live. Thank you for keeping them coming. Really appreciate that. And then there's that window in which students halfway through year 13 are then selecting which two universities to accept once they've got those offers through. Okay, so perhaps big single question is which university. We've heard from Charlotte and Joe which universities they've applied to. I mentioned the Russell Group here. Frankly, well, Oxford is very proudly a member of the Russell Group, but really we would say look at all aspects of a university course. Visit the universities you can, and don't actually shortlist yourself according to whether a university thinks it's in a certain group or not. For example, the Russell Group, we're very proudly a member of the Russell Group, and here are all the universities that are in the Russell Group on this slide. Brilliant universities, all of them. Apparently they're research universities that are particularly concerned with research. We would say all universities are really concerned with research. There's some amazing universities that have never been anywhere near the Russell Group. There's some universities that people would just assume are in the Russell Group, like, for example, St Andrews, the oldest university in Scotland, never been in the Russell Group. Brilliant university. The point that I'm trying to make is look far, look wide, and don't look at any sort of narrow banding of universities. Think about what course is best for you and which location, and those other key questions mentioned earlier are best for you. So now, just another brief poll. What are you thinking of applying in terms of subject? What are you thinking of applying for in terms of subject? Let's just have a little bit break at this stage and just hear from you again. Charlotte, Joe, well, our students are helping us with that. Were there any other subjects you were thinking? You mentioned before, Charlotte, you were thinking of applying to a conservatoire, but that was obviously for music-related studies. Any other subjects you were thinking of when it was at this stage in year 12? Can you remember?
Yeah, I was also really torn between if I wanted to do music or maths or physics.
Wow.
Yeah. I took a lot of STEM subjects at A level, so I really knew I liked those, and I really didn't know which route to choose. But I'm happy with my decision. But
So
I
the
think also
$64,000 question there, Charlotte, is how did you make that decision?
I mean, I think it was never a certain decision of mine, but I think every single time I kept coming back to music. So I sort of knew. And by the time it came to applying, I just went for one.
Yeah. Joe?
Yeah, I mean, similar, but maybe not as radical a split as you, Charlotte. I did biology for my A level, and I really enjoyed it. And I kind of knew that was, if I was to go down a scientific route, it would definitely be that path. However, because I was doing English and French, and because I was really, really enjoying English and French, I kind of was already leaning by year 12 towards the humanities side of things. I'd say maybe for me, the more important question was whether I wanted to pursue a joint honours course, which is what I'm doing currently, and which is a 50-50 split for me between English and French, or if I just wanted to pick one and go with it. So definitely tough choices to be made, but I think in the end, it was the open day for me. It was speaking to students and, obviously fantastic resources like we're providing online and through these sessions, which really helped me make my mind up.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And here are the subjects currently in the mix for our attendees. Wow, what a range. I mean, I'm not even going to attempt to summarize them because you can see them on the screen, so there's no need to. But what we see here is a clear spread across the curriculum, all sorts of subject areas. Oh, that's great to hear. It's great to hear. We would expect as well, following the lead of my slide, if you noticed the course that I deliberately put on there, that I would expect actually most of our attendees not really necessarily to know what it is. There are some subjects that some of you won't actually be familiar with what those subjects are because people are going down quite specific niche lines of study there. For example, material science, that somebody mentioned, is related to physics. It's a course at Oxford and other universities related to materials used in physics. Really sort of specific course there. One I put was anthropology. Yeah, most year 12s, I would say, wouldn't be aware that anthropology is the study of human civilizations. So somebody who's getting to consideration of a course like that, be it material science or anthropology, that's somebody who's probably, by definition, because you can't do A-levels in those two things, or A-level medicine, for example, if they think they're medicine, they're really using supercurricular to, firstly, to work out what that subject is and what the study of that is going to entail. Some subjects are just bigger than others as well. So 2 of these subjects here would be amongst our larger cohorts at the University of Oxford. Others would be amongst our smaller. For example, our archaeology and anthropology is one of our smallest courses at the university, but those students who are studying it really, really passionate about those 2 particular areas. As we said, and as Joe's also said, course choice, the most important decisions. Some courses are going to last longer than others. You can see usually the detail of these with 2 clicks, 3 clicks on the internet. One first point of reference I'd particularly recommend is if you go to ucas.com, which, as mentioned before, is technically independent of all the universities because it's all the universities together rather than one university. If you go to the courses on their homepage, I've actually put the link in here. You can then go straight to a course finder. And then if you put in chemistry, you'll find out all the hundreds of different chemistry courses, for example, available at universities. And usually with a click into each of those courses, you can find a really handy sort of all-on-one page table where it will show you the key overview of the course in years 1, 2, 3, or 4, and so on. Here's a couple of examples here. Really nice, straightforward. They'll also usually show you, as the one from Manchester does on the left, how their course is assessed as well, which is a critical part of it. There's some universities where there are finals. That's a system of examinations where basically your university degree mark is based on degrees in your final year. For instance, as an undergraduate, that's the first time you go to university. I was at the London School of Economics, and they had finals based on 2 years when I was there. So you had 50% in year 2 was going to be your degree mark, and 50% in year 3, for instance. Very, very different ways of teaching, very different places. Discover them, have a look at them. Even the University of Oxford, where we would say we have courses from across the academic sort of disciplines, we only have 28 in total, as you can see listed there. Some of them, as already mentioned, relatively small, some of them absolutely huge. Some of them, Joe's doing one of them, where you can combine in joint honours and do a couple of different subjects. So in reality, even at Oxford, where there's only 28 courses, the permutations, the combinations you can do would certainly far outnumber 28. So from different disciplines, some universities specialise only in certain sort of subject groupings. So, for example, Imperial College London is known around the world, amazing university for its STEM subjects. I've already mentioned the LSE that I enjoyed going to as an undergraduate, only does social sciences. They have a particular feel, these universities, and they feel very different. In my case, I thought LSE felt amazing for me. It was a personal choice. It's about potentially visiting them. It's about finding more about them online and from their current students. Frankly, what we're looking for in terms of applicants doesn't differ widely or wildly between university, because we're interested in really interested learners who are inspired by courses. The way we assess applications might differ if we're fortunate enough to be able to use, for example, admissions tests or interviews. But those parts of that Venn diagram there would not differ widely between different universities in terms of what we look at. And certainly in terms of Oxford, we're not sort of looking at one type of person. I'll give you one example of an attribute that would differ widely, and then I'm going to ask Joe and Charlotte about this. There may be a perception that because we interview, for instance, for some people might think, all right, okay, Oxford's probably looking for really sort of alpha confident people, the sorts of people would constantly have their hand up in class, those sorts. They've had their hand up 8 times a lesson in every lesson since reception. And then there's also people who, would take the view of, over my dead body, will I ever put my hand up in school? So let's say there were those two extremes of student, and many students would think, oh, well, Oxford, if they interview, they probably want all these kind of confident types. I bet they want those types where, they've constantly had their hand up. Joe, Charlotte, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think in terms of Oxford interviews, when we have interviews, the interviewers are looking for someone not who thinks that everything that they say is absolutely correct. They're looking more for your willingness to learn and how easy you are to teach, and your potential to learn. When you go to university, you're not expected to already know everything. The whole point why you're there is to be taught things, is to learn new things. So they're not looking for someone who thinks that they know absolutely everything. It's just like overly confident. But at the same time, they don't want someone that is too shy and too afraid to speak up, because something central to our system of teaching are tutorials. And tutorials are small groups where you have one tutor and then maybe 1, 2, or 3 students in a tutorial group. And because it's so personal in such a small group, speaking up is really important, and engaging in the tutorial and speaking up about your ideas is central to the teaching system. So it's really about finding a good balance somewhere in there.
Thank you, Joe.
I would add on to everything Charlotte said, and maybe even hopefully as a reassuring note, if you do feel shy and if you do feel like speaking up maybe doesn't come as naturally to you, which is what Richard was saying, that is something that is encouraged by your tutors for you to develop in. It's an area that you can definitely progress in, and I really feel that the tutorial system, being kind of maybe not one-to-one, but really small group sessions, gives you already kind of innately that boost of, oh, well, they want to hear my ideas and let me bounce off my peers who you'll get to know really well. So I think it is a system that's well built to encourage you and to be supportive rather than just intimidating. Even though even I feel a bit intimidated having done the work going in, the tutor is friendly and obviously such a rich wealth of knowledge in their field that they're going to be able to kind of guide you through and also inspire you. I think the tutorials are a really inspiring way of learning, and of hearing, someone who's clearly so passionate about the subject as you are. And on that passionate note, there's a final thing. I'd say enthusiasm is really key in the interview process. We've done a couple kind of interview prep sessions where we've really told people that it's okay not to know, like you said, Charlotte, it's definitely okay not to know, but they want to see your approach. They want to see, are you giving it a go? Maybe you say, that's a really tough question. I can't find the answer right now. However, one way I'd go about approaching it is, and kind of, seeing how you pivot on the spot, and that independence in your thinking, I'd say was really important.
Well, thank you, Joe. So much in there. To unpick slightly, tutorials at Oxford, how many people typically in terms of students are in those, in your experience, Joe?
So in my experience personally, it would be a group of about 3 maximum.
Yeah.
But I think it can vary. I think we tend to say, is it 2 to 4? You tell me, Richard.
Yeah, it's usually about 2 to 4. What do you find, Charlotte?
Yeah, and in some cases, I've actually had one-to-one tutorials as well.
Brilliant.
But not straight off the bat after I've met the tutor for a bit. So it's not as daunting.
Yeah. So this is a teaching system that's not quite unique to Oxford. Cambridge has a similar system, but they call theirs supervisions, which is just incredibly small teaching groups. And, just to re-emphasize, I suppose, and back up what Charlotte and Joe have just said, you do get a wide range of kind of, confidence in speaking in a room. But yeah, certainly people are enthusiastic about talking, but it doesn't have to be that sort of enthusiasm that's like, high-fiving everybody, metaphorically speaking, in a room as you come into it. It can just be quite a confidence or willingness when asked to talk about the problem that you're discussing in that week's tutorial, or the particular piece of music or piece of poetry, or piece of equations, if you like, depending on subject that's currently under discussion. Okay, thank you. As simple suggestions, we would say we're fairly straightforward. I mean, I can see some brilliant questions coming through on Slido, and there is a sense, for example, the one that asks about GCSE grades. It does depend. Often there are no hard and fast rules. What we would say is a straightforward hard and fast rule is we would suggest that you are going to need your minimum entry requirements. You can see the minimum entry requirements listed with a couple of clicks. Those Manchester and Cambridge examples I showed before would very clearly show the entrance requirement. Typically, entrance requirement will be the same for a given degree at a different given university. So, for example, everybody who's made an offer on general entry for history at Oxford is given an AAA offer. Everybody who's made an offer at Oxford for engineering science is given an A*A* offer, for instance. And those sets of 3 grades will be very easily attainable with a couple of clicks. Differing universities have different levels of requirements on GCSEs, as indicated by the question on Slido about GCSEs, and somebody's got sort of 6 or 7, 6 and 7s, to use a sentence that my 8-year-old sons would absolutely love. Some people would say that level of GCSE attainment would be, maybe everybody at Oxford's, everybody's got 8s and 9s exclusively. Depends on subjects. Medicine, for example, at Oxford is a subject where it would be relatively inflexible on GCSE grades, but actually, perhaps surprisingly, at Oxford, we would not be looking for a complete set of 9s, for example, because we would tend to look at A-levels as a better predictor, and A-level predictions from teachers as a better predictor of people thriving on university courses. We'll probably look more closely at the GCSE results that are more aligned to the subject you're applying for. So say, for example, if you're applying for physics, we're going to look really closely at physics GCSE, and we're going to look really closely at maths GCSE because it's highly related to physics, for example. We're going to really look closely at a test. We use a test to shortlist for interview. So frankly, at a university where they're in the privileged position of using a test, to be really clear, we're going to use the test far more than we do a personal statement to shortlist. Far more, because it's better substantiated. It provides us with more information about how you work, how you think, and how you're able to perform in a degree than your ability to put together a personal statement. Although, as we'll look at in July and the 7th of July session, personal statements are important, particularly for you, for clarifying for universities how you've come to the decisions you have. What we're really also looking for in an application as well is evidence of interest in a subject, which is best demonstrated by commitment to supercurricular enrichment. If you're here with us right now, which you are, great. That's commitment to supercurricular enrichment, and it's why we've been emphasizing this throughout the course, and we'll carry on emphasizing it. So to summarize that, different position for different universities, but also different A-level tariffs required for differing subjects within different universities. Oxford, our maximum offer, our highest offer is quite high enough at A*, A. That's a fantastic set of grades. And that might sound daunting, but be reassured that a university like Oxford that makes those sorts of grades, there are actually 2 universities that make offers at 3 A stars. We're not going to be making those sorts of offers unless we've got fairly clear indications that a student is well able to attain those grades through their predictions, through the rest of the information that we receive through the UCAS, and possibly through an admissions test as well. We also have a different entry route at Oxford called the Astrophoria Foundation degree, and I'll mention that a little bit later. That's for students who face seriously extenuating circumstances. More of that in a moment. Right now, in fact, sorry, I didn't think it was coming up straight away. So this is a separate entry route. This is rather than being on that early entry route in October, as is used by Cambridge, Oxford, and medicine and dentistry and vet science nationally. This is a separate entry route for students who faced real disruption to their studies, personal disadvantage. There are a range of criteria that are applied, and one of the reasons we use the word astrophoria at Oxford is because it's really easily searchable online. You can come straight to it, you imagine, with that name. And what that program does is it fully funds a student, including accommodation and living costs, for the first year of their studies, and takes them through a foundation year program, which then on satisfactory completion of that program leads to one of potentially 20 different degrees at Oxford through 4 entry routes: chemistry, engineering, material science, humanities or law, or philosophy, politics, economics. And then, as I say, satisfactory completion of that year leads to one of those full degrees at Oxford. So that's a separate entry route. The January deadline in 2027 is going to fall on the 13th. Really important thing to do, we would say, is to look at the selection criteria for the course, for the universities, plural, that you're applying for. They'll look different, but as I've already indicated, generally selection criteria can be quite similar in terms of some of the skills and aptitudes and descriptors they're looking at. Personal statements are your opportunity to finalize your thinking on university applications. Why am I applying for this? Why am I particularly suited for a course in this? And then to demonstrate that to the university to whom you apply. You get 4,000 characters over 3 sections. And I'm really going to leave personal statements to our session on the 7th of July, because we're going to go into really a bit of micro detail. I'm going to show you some great examples of supercurricular used brilliantly in personal statements in our view. So I hope you can join us for that. They're your opportunity to show us your interest, your enthusiasm, discuss your supercurricular. But also, I mean, we say good writing ability, it's just straightforward writing. You don't need to think about it as a writing task. It's really about straightforward clarification of why you're really going to thrive in a degree that you're applying for. They are pretty straightforward to do, and yeah, we'll really drill down into that with Joe and Charlotte's help and with our other ambassadors' help on the 7th of July. Admissions tests, they're called admissions assessments at Cambridge, are used extensively at Oxford and Cambridge, and also, as mentioned, nationally in some other subjects. We're looking to test you under time condition we're looking to test you really to see how you perform in an admissions test either in or related to the subject you're applying for. They are sometimes quite different from standard A-level studies. So some of them are tests of skills. For example, the LNAT, the Law National Aptitude Test, is a test of your ability. It's partly a test of your ability to work out a lot of information under time pressure, which is, after all, what we pay lawyers handsome fees to do in the professional world. The UCAT, used for medicine, tests some professional aptitudes similar to those used by doctors in healthcare practice, so they're very relevant. Some of them are very knowledge-based tests. Only in our case, a couple of the ones we use, and we make it really clear what people need to revise for before those tests, but they are not tests that take students away from their core academic studies. Most students who take admissions tests as part of an application to Oxford will take the UAT UK tests. And if you search online UAT UK, you can come to the homepage, as also seen there, for the 3 tests done by UAT UK, which are the Engineering Sciences Administration test, admissions test, the TMUA, which is a test of mathematics for university admissions, and the TARA, which is a kind of critical thinking test. Really interesting test, that one. We use these 3 tests extensively across lots of our subjects. Some of our subjects don't have admissions tests. And then some of them are used nationally as well. We use 2 of those tests already mentioned, the UCAT and the LNAT, for medicine and law respectively. They have their own registration and booking deadlines. Registration's actually available, open now for almost all the tests, not quite open for LNAT yet. And UCAT registration opens next week, he says, looking at his watch to check the date. But the UAT UK, you can start registering now for those tests as well. As mentioned before, written work is for Oxford and Cambridge sometimes required by some colleges, but we do actually require students to guarantee that that is written work that they've done anyway in their course of their core studies at school. In other words, it must not be written work done just for the purpose of the, say, Oxford application. So in other words, it's an administrative choice of which written work to submit. Just going to take a pause there. Joe, Charlotte, for you, did you take an admissions test firstly? Joe, come to you.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I did take an admissions test. I took one in French. I took one in English as well. I will say the English one, they were both online for me. The English one didn't go so well in my year. The people who were organising the test, who Oxford had contracted out, they kind of botched it up, unfortunately. So it wasn't taken into consideration. However, that I must stress that was an exception. My year wasn't the normal proceeding. So yeah, those do contribute to my course.
Wow. I mean, it's definitely worth mentioning that unfortunately we don't use that English test anymore. I say unfortunately because there's a real opportunity for students to shine, although I'm sure Joe wasn't that happy about that particular situation there. But to turn swiftly to matters of preparation, I'll ask you the same question in a moment, Charlotte, because I think your circumstance might be different, I'm guessing. But Joe, how did you prepare for an admissions test?
Yeah, no, of course. For the French admissions test, like you were saying, it is kind of testing those general skills. However, it was also testing more complex grammatical kind of areas. So these were things that we may have covered slightly in the A-level course, but they were kind of the more challenging end of those. So I did look online. There were practice tests available. I did quite a few of those. I spoke with my teachers about what areas they recommended for me to focus on. Whereas English was kind of similar to the interview where you're presented with a text you haven't seen before. You're going to look through it, trying to find out some key themes and building kind of an essay argument about that under time conditions. So for that, it kind of linked to what I was already practicing for A-level.
Brilliant. If I heard one word there, I heard practice. Charlotte.
Yes, so I didn't have an admissions test. I had to submit some written work. So I just chose a couple of essays that I had done at school. And then I also had to submit, just for music specifically, a 5-minute video of my playing. And also it was optional to submit some compositions if you'd been doing some, and a go at doing harmony and counterpoint work as well. So I had a little bit to do, but it was mostly just choosing what to submit from the work that I had already done.
So let me guess, Charlotte, was it one take and then you just, right, that'll do? It's not going to get any better. Send.
I can't remember really.
I'm guessing it probably
I can't even remember if I
There,
specifically.
but
yeah. I'm not. I can't really remember.
Well,
If you've heard Charlotte play piano, you'd know it's a one-take wonder sometimes with Charlotte.
I'm actually guessing that if Charlotte can't quite remember in the best sense that you can't remember really putting that that test together, I'm guessing you probably did it just fairly straightforwardly. But yeah, impressive if that was the case. I should also say that music, the exercise that Charlotte's just mentioned, but also similar in a sense for fine art, we asked for a sort of small for fine art, we asked for a small portfolio to be sent. But other than that, I can't think that any of the tests used at Oxford are particularly sort of practical in that sense. So yeah, real range of them. What I would like to say on tests is something that I very firmly say on interviews as well, is that it's in our interest as a university and also other universities who use tests for putting all the materials we can out there to clarify exactly what these tests are about. We don't want them to be an enigma. We don't want them to be a surprise. We don't want them to be some sort of secret that, if you know the code of how to pass these tests. No, we want to get it all out there so you guys can practice. So if you were to meet people or agencies, dare I say, online that can say, you pay us this money, we'll take you through these tutorials and show you the real secrets to passing these tests. You can probably work out from what I'm saying what we feel about these agencies. We want you to just practice the materials you'll find online without going to anybody else to help you and to relieve you of cash in the process. Also, on a serious note, that's really not what we're about as a university. We don't want to put barriers in place to students who many of us wouldn't be able to afford such agencies. So we're really keen that they would offer no advantage. To move on, at Oxford, we're in the fortunate position of everybody whom we're able to shortlist for interview is then given an interview at Oxford. All of our interviews are online, take place in December. We are looking to test a range of things, but essentially to cut it down to the crux, we're looking for a student's response to a question she probably hasn't had the chance to prepare. We do put sample questions out there online. You could go to Oxford website now, type in interviews in the search bar, and then you actually get sample questions on a tab, and they are exactly what they say on the tin. They're not the actual questions we ask, because that would be a bit daft, wouldn't it? Here's the interview questions. But they're sample questions, and you can probably work out what we mean by sample. And what we're trying to get to in these questions is the opportunity for you to show your thinking in a subject and really be thinking on the spot. Inevitably, I'm now going to turn to Charlotte. Charlotte, what was your music interview like then for Oxford, if you wouldn't mind sharing your recollections?
Yeah, so I had 3 interviews. I had one 40-minute interview with Trinity, and then I had 2 20-minute interviews with Magdalene. I remember my interviews, I had heard a little bit about talking through my thought process in the interview and about how it didn't really matter if I was right or wrong, but it was more just looking at how I approached things and how I responded to the interviewer's comments. So going into it, I felt a bit assured that I wouldn't really say anything like stupidly wrong, because I sort of felt like the tutors would be able to help me through that. And before the interview, I remember I would just practice saying things out loud and just trying to sort of make educational guesses if I didn't know the answers to anything. And that really helped my preparation. And then the interview itself, I just tried to sort of, yeah, just tried to show as much of my thinking as possible. And I actually really enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed hearing about what the tutors thought and trying to develop my ideas based on what they were saying. And the sort of things that they were saying was super interesting, and the ideas that they were bringing up. So I really enjoyed them, actually.
That's very positive. I didn't realise you'd had a 40-minute interview for music. That's quite long, isn't it? Did it feel like 40 minutes?
No, it didn't actually. I guess because it was split up into a few sections as well, because for sometimes in interviews you get sent pre-reading beforehand, and in my case I got sent pre-listening as well. And so I had a couple of things to go over, so it was actually just really enjoyable.
I love the idea of being sent pre-listening. Anyway, Joe, over to you. Same question, interviews.
Oh, Charlotte, that's made me really happy. That I'm glad that you enjoyed it, because I enjoyed mine as well. I'm not gonna lie, but I'm not gonna cherry. What's it called? Sugarcoat it. That's the one. I'm gonna put the cherry on top and say that it was all smooth sailing. I definitely was a little bit nervous, especially going in those kind of 20 minutes before. I was really thinking, have I got this? Am I going to be able to keep composed, keep calm? I luckily my school provided a quiet spot, but I know a lot of people do it at home as well. Having that quiet spot and just kind of getting into the zone with it. My interview I did 3, so I did 2 for English. One of the English one was like you said, I got sent pre-reading. I went through the pre-reading. They asked me questions, so sort of general questions, but also specifically on certain features that I might have picked out in that reading. The second English interview was more personal statement based, so it was a little bit more kind of about your interests, about super curriculars, in fact. So I was able to kind of reiterate my super curriculars. On the French side, again pre-reading, again literature, but also a bit of conversational French, which I was nervous about. But the lady that was doing it with me was super, super friendly, and warm, and kind of it went by in a flash. And in the end, I realized, okay, I might have said a couple things wrong, but it was all right in the end. So yeah, I think going into it with that positive mindset and realizing that it is only 30 minutes, so it's kind of give it your best in the short time that you have, and hopefully it goes well for you.
Sometimes we think as well where a student thinks, which after all is potentially quite, it's human nature, isn't it, to come out of an interview situation and say, oh, I wish I'd said that, or I could have said that better. But sometimes where a student thinks that maybe one interview hasn't gone as well as another, often that might be because she's been taken to a sort of point where she's at a stage where she doesn't know the answer, and that's absolutely fine. We're so used to, aren't we, in school and learning generally to think there's like an answer at the end of a journey, if you like. And that's not necessarily the prime focus of an interview, we would say, at Oxford and Cambridge. It's also not a question of sort of trick questions. Charlotte alluded to this earlier. The interviewer's there really to make you feel comfortable. So, for example, vocalizing, you thought, I think this is a question about carbon, isn't it? He says, making this up on the spot, assuming it's a chemistry interview. And then by vocalizing your thoughts out loud, by literally saying them out loud, you're giving the interviewer a chance to give you a bit of a nudge, a bit of a helpful steer, because that interviewer will relish that opportunity to help and assist and guide. So, just a few key points really. Minimum entry requirements probably going to have to be met by predicted grades. Practice, really important to practice as soon as possible if you have an admissions test, and also by demonstrating supercurricular activity. And if you're joining us for the first time this evening, you won't have heard us emphasize supercurricular before. Been an emphasis to some of the questions this evening as well, which is great, standing out in personal statements. And what I've tried to build up the idea of in this program is how important supercurricular learning is to us. Given examples, for example, by the one-man supercurricular genius that is David Attenborough through his television programming over the years. As students move through the age levels, probably some more demanding resources like journals or quite detailed podcasts. But making the point that it's really about your individual choice of supercurricular resource. There are menus, and here are 3 menus we could point you towards in Trinity and Beyond, as it's now called, from Trinity College, Oxford, University of Oxford Digital Resource Hub, and also University of Cambridge Supercurricular Suggestions. They are menus where you can find lists of supercurricular resources, but the most important supercurricular resource for you is probably what you're most interested in. When you're at the stage of getting towards writing a UCAS application, thus around now, if you're in year 12, we would suggest before putting pen to paper, it's actually online and typing, but before typing anything, you think about the best supercurricular you've done and try to be reflective about it. Sort of simple table like that, particularly that column on the right. What have I really taken from supercurricular resources? Trying to think of the best supercurricular resources that you've used in all the A-level subjects you're doing, and try to list those, even if it's a simple note in your phone, for example, before writing the personal statement first draft, because it's easier to get all of those details in your mind before writing the 4,000 characters, because you will have the same challenge as everybody, which is you've got a lot more material that would fit into the one page that 4,000 characters pretty much represents. So be selective on those. Some obvious to-do suggestions that we've mentioned tonight, particularly on admissions tests, particularly on exploring courses, and if possible, visiting universities if there's an opportunity to. At Oxford, we have 3 open days each year. The first 2 are the beginning of next month, July, and we also deliberately have one in September as well for those who would like to visit us later in the application process before that October deadline. We would just finally like to mention cost of universities. There's a lot about this, as there always should be in the media, because universities charge tuition fees and we should be answerable on why we think that's justifiable and where we think that go and how it's paid for. So going to university certainly appears expensive at first sight, and we very much appreciate that, certainly in our schools work on a daily basis. Universities have tuition fees, which are around about £9,500 at the moment. Universities are charging them the same amount across all universities. In addition, there are living costs, for students at universities, which they also need to pay, because students, of course, are living whilst they're also studying, of course. The government provides a certain amount of assistance. For example, for all tuition fees for all UK home students, it will pay tuition fees up front for every year that a student is with that university, as long as she's applied to Student Finance England, which is something that people generally do later on in year 13 once they've applied through UCAS earlier in the year. Tuition fees are paid up front, and nobody who's a UK home student has to pay those up front. The government pays them on your behalf. The government will also invite you to apply for a certain amount of maintenance funding to give you support with costs of living. How much you're eligible to apply for maintenance funding depends on a variety of factors. For example, if your course is in London, you can apply for more. If it's longer, you can apply for more. If it's overseas, partly, you can apply for more. If you're living away from home, you can apply for more, because all of those things are a little bit more expensive. It also depends on household income. The lower your household income, the more you're eligible to apply for, because it's deemed less likely that parents and carers will be able to support you. So you receive a certain amount of support from the UK government. When you leave university, you may be liable to repay it. More of that in a moment. But also the university you're with, for example, Oxford, we can talk about Oxford because we're from Oxford University, will also provide a certain amount of support. This is not a loan, but this is an annual grant, a gift to a student if her household income is under a certain amount. And we call that bursary at Oxford. We call that bursaries. Students will receive that support automatically if they're receiving and they've applied for that government support through Student Finance England. When a student graduates, she may be liable to start repaying the debt that she's built up. The average level of UK debt at universities at the moment for graduates who are leaving universities is a quite daunting sounding figure of £44,000 that a student will have built up on average. Average, of course, means that some students have built up more debt than that. Some students have built up less debt than that. When she leaves university, the student is going to start repaying that debt only if, at the moment, her income exceeds £25,000 a year. And the amount that she'll repay, this is where student debt is quite unique amongst UK debt. She'll only repay the difference between her earnings and 25,000, and there'll be 9% of that difference. So in other words, the amount of debt that students repay, graduates repay after university, depends not on what they owe, but on what they're earning, which is very different. And also lots of universities will keep costs down in all sorts of ways. At Oxford, we're in a privileged position of being able to assist students very directly with a lot of, for example, subsidised accommodations available for the whole duration of a degree at a majority of our colleges, for example, which is a subsidising landlord typically charging rent for 24 weeks a year, 3 8-week terms rather than 52 weeks a year, which is why Oxford is able to claim some justification and publicly that if you're living away from home, it can be a seriously less expensive option than others. For instance, different universities will make different cases for their costs, and of course we'll have different programs of assistance. What we would like to say as universities and as Oxford, we would like to say, particularly if you're younger and you're hearing these figures for the first time, they do sound daunting, the cost of universities. What we would say is we think, we are biased, that it's an investment worth making. And what we'd also particularly like to emphasize is that if you think a university course is right for you and that university is right for you, you may be deterred by all sorts of factors, but we would not like you to be deterred on the cost, because we think the realities of that are quite different to how it looks up front. Charlotte, Joe, I'm not going to ask you about individual financial information, but when you apply to university, was cost quite a consideration? Charlotte?
Yeah, definitely. Some of them, the main conservatoires that I was looking at were in London, which is obviously very expensive to live in London. And I knew that coming here would be a lot more cheaper, so that was definitely one of my deciding factors.
Interesting. Thank you, Joe. Interestingly, would you mind my saying you come from London originally, don't you?
Yes,
Yeah.
in fact, I was going to say, yeah, coming from London and experiencing myself and my family, obviously cost of living in London is very high. And it doesn't go to say that cost of living in Oxford isn't high either. But like you said, Richard, the direct support, I think I've really felt the benefit of. And it is kind of, when you have such an intense study program, it's reassuring to know that in some way, at least, the college community can support you financially. So that's been a big thing for me, but obviously it is a serious consideration and shouldn't be taken lightly.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your candor there as well. I also owe a huge thank you tonight to Mahima. Mahima's the person who's been in the background. I don't know whether Mahima's recruited a band of she's gone out but the amount of questions that Mahima has responded to. So I don't know whether Mahima's going to hear this, but I will certainly reach out to her to thank her personally as well. And I will also do so on behalf of those of you who've been able to ask these questions, because the total of questions in Slido that have not already had a response from Mahima is 1, and it's on university funding and the position of finance at universities, which, yeah, Guillermo, there are some universities that are facing funding challenges. I wouldn't say they're running out of funds, but you can see that question on Slido. Our response on that would be a possibly something that would be a little bit, I'm not saying that you think this, but that's been put around some concerns, let's say, about university funding. I wouldn't say that's the general position in terms of UK universities' financial positions. Just mention that because that's literally the only question that Mahima didn't come to. So what I'm going to do is a bit familiar to you now. I'm going to hand back to Charlotte and Joe. Thank you for all your questions. Thank you for all your participations in the polls. I'm going to leave the registration poll open for a few seconds, but then Charlotte's going to tell you about another poll, or Joe will in a moment, and then over to you.
That's brilliant. Charlotte, shall I take it first and I'll hand over? Wonderful. Thank you so much, Richard. That session was really, really, we covered so much and really informative. Just to let you guys know what is coming up next on the 16th of June. We're now on the 9th. There we go. 16th of June, we've got a cross-curricular Oxplore talk. So that'll be the second Oxplore talk we're doing. As Charlotte's been saying, these really aren't tied down to just one subject. It's more about the critical thinking and the broader questions. So that's what we've got coming up. Next slide when you can. And as you can see there, it's going to be the same time and the same link, hopefully online, for the second Oxbow session with Sophia and the outreach team as well, getting involved.
One of the more intriguing Slido questions I've just seen is, we have gone over time, which, yes, thank you, I appreciate. I fancy that might be Mahima in the background. If I were her, I'd probably be writing that on Slido because she's been working so hard. So thank you for bearing with us. We have gone over time. I even used an emoji in my response to that. Thank you. What we will say now, though, is, well, Charlotte, over to you.
Well, just a quick note to say, please answer the feedback poll that we're going to send out on Slido. As usual, it will always help us shape the programme, and your feedback is super important to us because this programme is for you guys.
We have actually used a slightly different quick survey poll than the normal one because it's the applying at competitive universities. So thank you, Charlotte. Thank you to all of you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again next week. And also for those of you who are just going to join us for the other competitive university session, that is on Tuesday, 7th of July. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Take care, guys.
Thanks, everyone.